Welcome everyone to Tech Tactics Live. We're in the Poconos. We're at Porsche Parade. Our Porsche Parade is in full swing. We've got a number of seminars that are going today, and we thought we would broadcast a few of them live. If you're not watching it live with us today, we will send some of these out and publish them at a later date. I would like to ask you if you enjoyed this segment or any other segments that you've watched on PCA's YouTube channel, give us a like, give us a comment, but more importantly, we're trying to reach 100,000 subscribers because that makes a big difference for us. So each of you that are watching can make a difference. Just hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost a thing, but it would mean so much to us. Today we're going to be talking about the Porsche market. You've seen him before in a number of PCA videos. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's probably forgotten more Porsche knowledge than I'll ever even know. I consider him a brother from another mother. We have amazing similar interests and interest in overalls, maybe not so much, but other things we definitely do have in common. Nathan Merz, welcome to the stage.
Thanks. Oh, look at that. Secretly, I was trying to steal the overalls in that maneuver, but well, thanks for having me out, Vu.
So you are the owner of Columbia Valley Luxury Cars,
Yep.
as well as you are our valuation expert on the tech committee. And I can tell you, typically on our YouTube channel, when we're talking about values of Porsches, it goes through the roof in terms of views and likes, and so you're our YouTube star.
Oh, well, that doesn't really speak that well for the club. If this is the face of stardom for the club, we have a lot of work to do. I'll just say that.
Your knowledge is the
Okay.
star.
They love my brain, not my looks. I appreciate that. I don't feel like I'm just here for that.
So I'm going to let you do your thing. I'm going to stand on the side here, and if there's questions from the audience, I might feed you a couple. But I know you've prepared slides, and go ahead and educate folks.
Okay, sounds good. So today we're going to be talking a little about something everyone likes to hear about, or it's kind of the hot topic at all these things, and this is the Porsche market in the era of the online auction, right? And so we're going to talk about how this has affected the market, whether you should use an online auction site as a buyer, as a seller, what some of the pros are, what some of the cons are, how this shapes the future, and maybe a little bit about pricing and what I think is going to happen in this very roller coaster moment we're in from an economic standpoint. So with that, we're going to do a little magic snap, and they're going to change our slide. I'll pretend I have a clicker. Oh, look at that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nathan Merz. And I tell people I have a BS in criminal behavior analysis, 3-year applied practicum at Cal State San Quentin. That's where I get my background. I've got a Master of Arts in Creative and Deceptive Ad Copywriting. You know, I am a used car dealer, so I took that used car dealer university. And I have a PhD in automotive economics, School of Hard Knocks in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota. Anyone from out there? So that's my background. So basically anything I say is of no value. So just, you didn't pay much to be here, so this is what we got. So next slide, I'll give you my real background. Basically, if you call PCA and you say, what's my car worth, you get me. So that's sort of my background, is understanding the market, what the cars are doing, what they're worth. You can find me in Panorama. You can find me on Tech Tactics. I consult in a lot of different various entities about valuation, insurance companies, auction houses, that sort of thing. And then I actually do this for a living, believe it or not. I buy and sell and deal in Porsches out of Seattle, Washington. But primarily what I am is I'm just like everybody in this room. I'm a lifetime Porsche fanatic. I just born with a love for the brand and a love for the cars. And so every year I come out and I enjoy bringing a car out here just like everybody else. So with that, let's talk about online auctions. So how has the online auction changed the Porsche landscape? Well, it's changed it radically. Right? That's a simple way to put it. It's a radical and fundamental change in how our market behaves. Really, prior to the online auction, most collector cars were sold either in traditional auction formats or in all your typical places like Auto Trader, Car Gurus, Craigslist, those kind of places. It was once considered the niche. It was like, oh, little niche cars get sold online. Now it's considered the market. The market really is now defined by what cars do in the online venue. Now, instead of people looking up, for example, NADA Classic Car Guide for a value, they go to something like Bring a Trailer and they look in the history and they say, what are the cars like this sold for? Right? It sort of sets a standard. Another big point, during any market shift, the players, right, both entrenched and new entrants must pivot. So it's a time of great turmoil and change in the automotive landscape. So you have your traditional sellers, you know, right? Imagine when the internet first came out, how many dealers were like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to have a website, right? And of course, they all had to come to that point. And then you had a lot of people, oh, I'm not going to sell online. Well, that obviously has changed, right? The other thing that's happened is some new players that maybe didn't have the capital or the resources to have a big standalone brick and mortar dealership, right? Now can be a big player in a different space in an online venue. So you'll notice, for example, on Bring a Trailer, there's some power sellers on there that I don't think really had any car presence until just a few years ago. They kind of found a whole new niche, and they've taken on and taken out some big players. So it's an interesting time of lots of things changing in the market. And there's also lots of competition. So I talk about Bring a Trailer because I grew up in an era where you Xeroxed something and you blew your nose on a Kleenex. So I'll use the term Bring a Trailer as kind of the whole online auction space. But there's probably 25 different new entrants in that space. Even Porsche themselves has launched one called Marked, which is run by Porsche Digital. So everyone's attempting to get into this space. And for the most part, they're all trying the same fundamental model. Little tweaks here and there, but the formula is basically the same. Your traditional auction houses, they're changing up how they're selling cars. They're doing more like hybrid sales. They'll have some cars, for example, when I was at Amelia Island, Gooding had the cars on display. You could go, or this was Scottsdale, I take that back. You could go see the cars, inspect the cars, but the actual bidding took place online. So it was this weird sort of hybrid model. And even the OEMs, like I mentioned, Porsche Digital has launched Marked. So even they're trying to get into the game. Next slide for us. Okay, I'm going to do a couple caveats here. There are many online auction companies. I do not implicitly endorse any particular company. So if you see mention of a company, I'm not giving a pro or a con, or if I don't mention a particular company, it's not because I have an opinion about it. If you want to talk to me offline, I'm happy to give an opinion, but in a broad sense, I'm sort of neutral as it comes to the platforms. And again, I speak predominantly about BAT because they are the market leader. They probably represent, I'll bet you 85% of the market at the moment, both in terms of absolute volume and dollars. I am a fan of the online auctions, but I think it's important to go into it with your eyes open. It's not a perfect panacea of everything is perfect there. And so people ask me, well, do you sell all your cars online in an online auction? No, I don't. Back to your question, how do I get my cars? I get them with relationship. And the one thing I have found when I sell in an online auction format is that I don't have the opportunity to build a relationship. And I'm a relationship person. That's why I'm here. I like to know my customers. I like them to know me. I like them to come to my operation and we break bread and we have fun and we buy cars. That's just how I like to do things. But I do sell some things online. I think I've sold, in fact, I sold a 68 911S on Bring a Trailer right before Parade, and the buyer actually was here at Parade. So luckily I was honest with him. I didn't have to like hide under the table when he realized what he bought from me. Okay, next slide for us. Okay, so this is sort of an interesting historical moment. August 8, 2014, this was the very first Porsche sold on Bring a Trailer. It was the fourth car they ever sold, so not even quite 8 years ago. It was a 86 3.2 Carrera, sold for $45,000, and this is their auction number 4. If you guys don't know the history about Bring a Trailer originally started as a site of just like-minded people like us. We would find some oddball car on something like eBay, and people would just want to talk about it. So they'd post a link, and then Vu and I, we would geek out over this Mustang 5-liter of our childhood, right? And we'd talk about, ooh, is that an Alpine 7903 radio in the dash? And we would talk about this and that. And the founders just really wanted to figure out, how do you monetize that? Now I got millions of people chattering, but we're not making any money. And so they had this idea, hey, maybe we'll take where eBay basically dropped the ball. This conversation would have been entirely different if eBay wasn't ridiculous. eBay owned this space in the late 90s. Remember this, right? I mean, they were killing it. But what eBay did, which was so foolish, is they didn't manage just a couple things. They lost the confidence of their buyers. eBay became synonymous with scammy, right? So people say, oh, you bought it on eBay. It was almost like you had to wash your hands after you said that, right? So once you lose customer trust, everything goes downhill. So you had that. And the other thing is they pandered to dealers and they became an advertising venue. So it used to be you only could buy via auction. Then it became basically a listing site, right? And then the other thing people didn't like is the whole bid sniping right? That someone could sneak in the last with a better internet connection, and they would beat you out for that rare 356 side spears you were trying to find, right? And so basically, the founders of BAT kind of essentially took that model and they added two really important things, kind of the secret sauce. One is the 2-minute bid extension. So if someone wants to buy it and you're in the last 2 minutes, the bid goes another 2 minutes. And then the most important thing they did is they created community, right? And they realized when people make commentary, you essentially, on the backs of free experts, you give people a sense of confidence. And that's what they didn't have with eBay, right? Now we're going to talk about what the problem with that is, but that's the basic model. So again, not quite 8 years ago, they changed kind of the world with this very first Porsche they sold. So let's go to the next slide. I'm kind of a data nerd, and so I wanted to look, and I said, okay, let's just take that same date in August, each of these years, and let's look at their growth. So 1 year later, they now had 15 cars for sale, 4 of which were Porsches. Okay, not bad growth. By 16, they had tripled in size to 49 cars, 9 Porsches. Now, mind you, this is just 1 day. So I just took 1 day in August each year, right? By 17, they had 97 cars. Okay, they doubled again, 11 of which were Porsche. It's their #1 brand by far. August of 18, 202 cars. They doubled again. Now they're up to 35 Porsches. We take 2019. Interesting, right? Relatively flat between 18 and 19. Do you know why that is? Anyone know why that is? No? Nope. Interesting enough, in this period of time, BAT was trying to figure out how they manage their growth. They've been growing so fast, and they kind of put a pause, and they started curating their cars a little bit more. And you notice that people started complaining that BAT wouldn't accept my car. And they were trying to figure out, like, what do we do? Okay. I'll tell you how that changes. August of 2020, now we have 315 cars. So again, we grow massively up to 50 Porsches. Does anyone know what happened between August of 19 and August of 20? No, a little bit of that. But in June, they couldn't figure out how they were going to manage their growth, and they sold. And they sold to Hearst. Hearst is a very large publisher, right? And so you don't see huge changes in August because they just had finished the transaction. I think it happened end of June. But you can see what happened the following year. But then they were up to 444 cars. And this is just on one given day, right? 57 of which were Porsches. And as of today, I checked this morning, 619 cars, 82 of them are Porsches, right? So you log in today, they have 82 Porsche auctions running at this exact moment. Pretty unbelievable growth. So you can see why this has changed the market so much. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so challenges with growth. When you grow like this, what is this problem? Well, the biggest thing is, and I don't have the answer to this, but can the market support 80 plus Porsche sales every single week, plus the volume all the other online auctions are doing? Is the market large enough for that? I don't know, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's a huge change, right? So you've got that. Now this is my most important point. Is there a depth of expertise to truly spread across all auctions? No. Back when there was, say, 3 cars, like for example, there might be one 356, and maybe a dozen truly knowledgeable 356 experts would chime in, and they would say, no, that is not the correct this or the correct that, right? And BAT built their reputation that way because people said, well, I know really knowledgeable 356 people are weighing in, and I feel more comfortable because they said, that's the wrong handle for the screwdriver. That's not the right placement for the fuel pump. That's actually not how they would have stamped the engine numbers, right? Now when they have 80 Porsches, are there enough experts in the world to chime in valuable input on 80 Porsches? I have an answer to that one. The answer is no. There just isn't enough experts out there to chime in valuable content, right? So, what happens when that goes on? Well, everyone loves attention. So now we have kind of what I call, we'll skip a point and we'll come back to that, less substantive comments and more fanboys. Fanboys are the, oh, that's great. This seller's awesome. Boy, is that cool, right? But there's no meat to those comments, right? But yet they still feel this legacy like the car has been vetted by experts. And even worse, now there's also the people that just like to hear them speak. and they once logged into 356 Registry or Renlist or Pelican Parts, and they now think they're an expert, and they'll go, oh, well, actually, and they sound very official. But if you actually know what you're looking at, they're so full of crap, it's crazy, right? But then 3 other fanboys are like, well, Tony 456 is the most knowledgeable 356 guy I've ever met. I'm like, I think Tony's 12 and lives in his mom's basement, right? But again, then people say, well, I feel comfortable buying a car because it's been vetted by experts. Well, who are said experts, right? So that's happening. And again, the quality of participation has dropped, which is the secret sauce. You can even just look at the volume of substantive comments. I mean, it used to be a typical auction might have 100 comments, of which at least half were kind of value-add comments. Now your typical auction, you can count on one hand how many value-add comments there are. The bulk of them are something like, oh, my dad had a 68 912. That's a cool comment, I don't have a problem with it, but it doesn't add any interest or value to the auction, right? Or someone says, oh, it's great, you know, last Tuesday I saw one of these at Cars and Coffee. Cool, I'm glad, that's fine, but it's not as valuable as when someone says, oh, wait a minute, a 68 should not have this or that, right? So that's one of the big challenges with growth. Next slide here. So the question everyone asks is, well, should I buy via an online auction? And the number one thing I always tell people is view it no differently than any other venue. I have a policy, what I call platform agnostic. We have a hard time in this. Porsche people, let's be honest, we're snobby people sometimes, right? We somehow ascribe values to different things. So when you say to someone, oh, you got your car and bring a trailer. Oh, good job. But if you say to someone you bought it off Craigslist, they're like, oh. Yeah, he's not getting an award. His car's no good. I'm like, it's the same car. Like, the car doesn't know where it was bought or sold. So be platform agnostic. So don't ascribe any level of safety or comfort to one platform that's better than another. Buying a car is inherently risky wherever you get it. You know? I always tell my customers, I get customers from me all the time, they'll say, well, I want to buy a car from you because I don't have to do any work because I know it's all vetted. I'm like, well, I like to think that's true. I said, but I would still encourage you to have a PPI in one of my cars. Right? Do your same due diligence. Again, don't assume any more additional level of safety. If we talk online auctions, how much vetting does the online auction company do on the cars that are submitted? Nothing. I should say they don't do nothing. The only thing they do, I will say they do now, they didn't used to do, is you do have to send them a copy of the title. Doesn't mean you actually have it in your hands or that title belongs to you, but you do have to have a copy of the title. That's all they do. Everything that they have is provided by the seller. There's no vetting whatsoever, right? Oh, you moved me forward. There we go. So again, don't assume any additional level of safety. And again, it's that weird thing because there's community. People feel like, well, I'm not that bright on this car, but someone in the auction is surely going to point out if there's a problem. Well, I'll give you an example why that's not happening. I'll give you an example. When BAT was first new, I used to make a number of comments. One, because I could. I mean, there was only 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 Porsches at the time. But now it's big enough and it's public enough that if I comment on someone else's auction because I'm in the business, it can look like sour grapes. And I also don't want to sort of additionally provide any kind of warranty or sense of feel-good at a car I haven't personally inspected. So I just don't weigh in, right? And I know most of the people I know that are true experts have gotten to that space too. It's just not worth it for them to weigh in. Okay, so the other question people say is, well, if I buy it at an online auction, I'm going to pay too much for it. Well, large exposure generally means full market price. I mean, that's one of the reasons people sell there. But not always. Honestly, there are some cars that sell for well over what I think is market. But believe it or not, there are still some cars that sell for under market on there, right? And actually, if we get off Bring a Trailer as one auction, we talk about online auctions in general. I think one of the arbitrage opportunities right now in the market is some of these up-and-coming sites don't have the traffic, and there's people that are buying on the lesser-known auction sites and then remarketing it on a better platform. It's not a terrible way to do it, right, if you're just looking at it from an opportunity standpoint. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now, not just buying, but what about selling? Well, my answer is maybe. The formula is trickier than it would appear. right? So we'll talk about what that is. I always tell people, this is the big if you're willing to execute on the formula, then yes. If you have any doubts or lack of desire or ability to execute on the formula, then I would tell you no. And I'll tell you what this formula looks like, right? A lot of people say, well, it's no risk. I put the car out there. If it doesn't sell, I'll go a different direction. It's actually not true. Here are your basic risks. Your number one risk, and I think this is unfair, but there's a perception, let's say you put your car out there. You have this gorgeous 73 914 2-liter. You take out your flip phone, you snap a couple overexposed photos, and you leave your lunch on the seat and you put it out there and you're like, they're going to see. It was a parade winner at Poconos 74 and they're going to know it. And you put it out there and you have a $50,000 reserve and the car stops bidding at 37. Well, the damage you've done now is a lot of people, if you go relist it, they'll say, well, you put your car out there and the market said your car was worth 37. It's not worth 50. Now, I don't necessarily believe that to be true. I would argue that it didn't hit the right price because you didn't execute on the formula. But a lot of people will then use that as the comp. So you create your car's own comp if you're not careful. That's a big risk. The other big risk that nobody talks about, and I'll talk about here, is the deadbeat buyer. The number of auctions that actually do not close would astound people. And nobody talks about it. Because the way it works, a lot of people don't realize, is that these online auction companies are not truly auctions. A true auction is an intermediary. I'll give you an example everyone can understand. You have your house on the market. I have this beautiful house. Vu falls in love with my garage. I even have an overall holder right next to the door. He says, this is my house. So Vu's agent and my agent, they kind of work it out. We strike a deal, right? In a traditional model, Vu and I never meet, right? All the money gets handled by the escrow company, and they hand over keys, they pay over the taxes and all this stuff, and then one day I get my keys, and never the twain shall meet, right? Intermediary. In a traditional auction house, that's the way it works too, right? If I go buy a car at Gooding or RM, something like that, Barrett Jackson. In an online auction, all that happens is Vu falls in love with my car. He's the high bidder. At the end of the auction, I get an email, and it says, congratulations, your car has sold. Well, it actually hasn't. Your buyer is Vu, and it gives me Vu's phone number and his email. So what have I really gotten? Well, what I got is the world's very hot, probably hottest lead, the most expensive very hot lead, right? I still have to do the transaction, but all of a sudden, Vu says to me, he says, oh, good, I'm glad I won the car because when Mr. Miyagi sells, anyone who knows Vu knows what Mr. Miyagi is, I'll have the money and then I can buy your car. Well, no, wait a minute, that wasn't the deal. Or Vu says, oh, good, I want to get a PPI before I pay for it. Or, oh, gosh, I didn't really realize I was going to win, right? Or, will you take my 69 Camaro in on trade? No, right? Well, now what do? Well, BAT already got paid, or the online auction company. They ding the credit card immediately for the 5%. So particularly like on a low-value car, let's say it's a $20,000 car, it costs them $1,000 to basically hold the car up. And the only sort of power we have is they can ban his account, which just means he just establishes a new account, right? So this never gets talked about. The way you'll see it, though, a lot of times you'll see auctions come up, it'll say, through no fault of their own, the buyer didn't go through. Now your car's value's been damaged because then everyone thinks, oh, well, did the buyer look at it and decide that it wasn't good, right? So there are risks. Let's go to the next slide. So, we talk about executing the formula. What is the formula? The good news is the formula is pretty easy to understand. The number one most important thing is absolute rock star photography. If you still own a flip phone, or you own an iPhone probably less than a 13 without the 19 cameras on the back, and you don't actually have some basic understanding of photography, do not take photos and submit them of your car. Like, the photos are what sells the car. Trust me on this one, right? If you're ever going to invest money, invest it in photography. If you want to know this to be true, you find your big power sellers, they're the ones with the best photography. Now, I personally have a beef about this, and here's my observation. There are a lot of us that get emotionally drawn to what I call Instagram porn, right? It's a photo that, the the lighting and it's the sunset and there's a train and whatever back there and it's like, woo, you know. But the car itself, like, you really can't tell what the heck it is, right? But man, does it look sexy. Now, I would agree, if you're going to sell a car, have that one shot as sort of your opener to get people to click on it. But then the rest of your photos, they want to be well done, but they should be more documentary to actually show you what you're buying. Because you're not buying that car on the perfect sunset, because believe it or not every day will you drive the car will the sun be out. I promise, right? And so what happens is you get those over-filtered, sort of generated and touched up photos, and people think that dream shows up off the truck. And they get there and they're like, oh, not quite as sexy in person, right? So be careful with that one. So rockstar photography. The other thing is have the car prepared to excellence. If I see one more car that maybe they've invested the money to have good photography and the car's dirty, or there's like such an easy flaw that's so easy to remedy. Pretend you're going to Parade and you're prepping for Concours. That's how your car should look before you take photos. People will say to me, oh, well, it won't show in photos. I said, I 100% guarantee you it will. The other thing is I call it no low-hanging fruit. Americans in particular, we're very lazy people. Let's just be honest, right? We don't like to fix anything. And so sometimes like a customer will bring a car to me and there'll be something really obvious to remedy. They're like, oh, well, if it's a problem, we can deal with that. Or no, fix it, right? Like don't list your car with something really obvious that jumps out that you can fix for $100. Now there are certain things you just can't remedy, then it is what it is. But I call it low-hanging fruit. Just go pick the 4 or 5 things you can do for pretty easy money. That's the next thing. The other thing is know what the hot buttons are for that model and either proactively address or have the right answer. So the big one in this room, of course, is IMS bearing. If you have a 986, 987, 997 era car, 100% guarantee you will be asked about IMS bearing. Do not get caught flat-footed. So one of the things you want to be thinking about is you always want to be proactive than reactive, because then you get to set the narrative. So you get to decide how that rolls out. So you're not caught on your back foot and having to be defensive. It's better to say, yes, IMS was done on this date. Here's the documentation. Here's the solution I used. Okay? Or if you haven't done it, just come right out and say, you know, I made this decision. Here's how I know. And then it's out there, right? Whereas if you act like, or, oh, I won't bring it up, it will come up and usually not in the way you want it to, right? So know what they are, and every model Porsche has their known things. If you have a 911 SC, they're going to ask you about, you know, pop-off valves, chain tensioners, and broken head studs, right? I mean, it's just the same thing. If you have a GT3, they're going to ask about over-revs and pinned lines. Just go preview some auctions of some cars that you're selling or buying, and you're going to quickly figure out what the questions are. Okay? The other thing is be very responsive. Again, this is ridiculous, but literally, like, take a vacation week damn near, right? Like, people expect to post a question and you respond in like 9 nanoseconds. It's ridiculous. Like, they act like you don't have a life, but if you don't respond right away, they'll assume you're hiding something. So it's okay if you, for example, can't get the information, just tag the person and say, oh, great, you know, I'm out for 2 days, but when I get back, I'll put it up on a lift and I'll get you the photo you wanted, right? Don't just let it sit for the 3 days, assuming it'll be fine when you get back, because then you'll have 10 people yelling at you and they'll assume you're crooked. It's ridiculous. I call this be a politician. If you have thin skin, there are a few of us in PCA that have thin skins. Not a shocking thing to say. Think twice if you really want to do this, because people will call your baby ugly. They will call into question your character. And you need to be able to practice deep breathing, because you'll have your car that you're so proud of, and some, again, 12-year-old in his mom's basement will say something that's actually just factually untrue. And you'll want to just pound this person, just like scream, right? Deep breathing, right? Think twice before you hit send on your response, because the other thing that's funny is, and it's almost like sport, you can almost watch this, like this will happen and you'll see like a seller kind of, people smell blood in the water. So someone will put a negative comment and the seller says something snarky, And I literally in my head, I yell out, no, don't do it. And people love blood in the water because so they see the snarky sellers and then someone else just kind of pokes the bear a little bit and then it's on. And then you just see the whole auction just go way off, right? And next thing you know, like, fight breaks out and knives come out and you're like, oh, this poor car. So if you really don't think you have the constitution to handle that, this is what I tell people. When in the least doubt, hire a pro, right? I mean, really. I mean, if you actually study the data, what you'll find out is the top power sellers on these sites are the ones that have almost all the top sales. Very rarely you see a private seller hit record numbers on a given car. And it's because it's kind of an art form. It's like any other skill. You get better at it doing it more. Okay, next slide for us. Okay, so buyers, isn't it safer? No. In case I wasn't clear, no. Any doubts about if it's safer? I'm not saying it's less safe, but again, it's just like any other venue. With that in mind, do not assume the car has been vetted by the expert audience. I jokingly call this person, I love my Porsche. Might not be the expert he thinks he is, right? We all know those people. I mean, there's some people on there, like if I were to meet them in person, I would have to resist from just choking the life out of them. But I'm not sounding like a very nice person, am I? But some of these people, oh my gosh. So again, perform the same due diligence you would with any other venue. Skip this at your own peril. I get so frustrated. That breaks my heart. I get calls all the time because of what I do, right? Because people call about values and stuff. And they'll say, oh, I bought this car on XYZ, and it didn't work out. And I said, well, what kind of due diligence did you do? Well, I reviewed all the photos, and I read all the comments, and, it seemed like a pretty good car. I'm like, so essentially you didn't do anything? Well, no, I mean, I looked at the photos, and I go, so essentially you did nothing, right? And they're upset that they got a bad result. They said, well, I couldn't have done anything different. Well, actually, you could have. Were you willing to do what it takes? If anyone went to my session yesterday, I helped a guy named Gregory Brown with his 993 twin turbo. I got on a plane. It took me 4 flights to get to remote Quebec in the wintertime to go look at a Porsche. But it was a very expensive car, and he wanted to know what it was like, and he was willing to pay my time and travel to go do it. Was it ideal? Probably not. Could he have spent a lot of money with me and found out it was a bad car and felt like it was wasted money? If he was smart, he would feel like it was well spent money, right? But it worked out beautifully, right? Or he could have just shipped it, and it might have worked out fine. But it might not have, right? So, again, at your own peril. The other thing is, and we talked about this a little bit, the transaction still is between the buyer and the seller. Again, once that online auction company gets paid, they're out. In almost no circumstance, unless there's something outright excruciatingly fraudulent. I mean, we're talking excruciatingly so. Like as in they actually don't own a car. Will they actually get involved? Because you'll notice what all the language says in all the ad copy. Seller states, believed to be, claimed. It's all very descriptive, sort of distancing language, right? So if you go to buy a car and you buy it on online auction and you go see the car and it's radically different than the description, if you go back to the online auction company, they're going to tell you, we said the seller stated. We didn't inspect it. Good luck, right? So again, you still have to handle all the payment and all that stuff like you would if you sold it on Craigslist. Same process. Okay, next slide here. Okay, pricing. Seemingly good for sellers, bad for buyers. People say, well, I'm going to sell on there because I'm going to get this record price, but I'm certainly not going to buy on there because I'm going to pay too much. I don't know if that's true, right? We define a market as a willing buyer and a willing seller. The big thing with an online auction, it's a very efficient market, right? An efficient market, really what you need for an efficient market, right? You need low barriers and you need a large audience, which they have, right? I mean, this is really where, for example, why Bring a Trailer is doing markedly better than maybe some of the other online auction sites because they have enough eyeballs, right? As such, cars generally bring market correct pricing. So when we go to these things and we banter over our coffee and donuts about a car that sold for what we think is some ludicrous number, What we don't realize is that majority of the cars actually sell for about market correct. But we remember the outlier, right? Most of them sell for about market correct. Occasionally, a car does sell for over, for whatever reason, right? 2 buyers were in that room, and that car was everything to them, so we've got that piece. The other thing is, occasionally, a car sells under market, right? And why the heck does that happen? We've got this efficient marketplace. The number one reason is a seller who did not execute on the formula, right? Sometimes you get the person who did take their flip phone photos, and they got their burger on the seat, and they have some really obvious stuff, and then they got snarky. But maybe you were fortunate, and they lived in the next town over, and you actually went and looked at the car. And you were like, actually, it's a good car. Now you're competing against people that think bad car, and your information tells you good car, right? So you probably have an opportunity to buy that car because that person didn't execute the formula. The other thing is, and this sometimes you can't help it, if you end on a bad day, if you happen to end on a day where the stock market's down 1,000 points, or you end up ending on a holiday weekend, those are not good times to end an auction, and sometimes you just can't control that. So I've seen some really good cars that just, particularly lately as the stock market's been doing this, you buy on a real volatile day, there's a couple buys on there. Okay, next slide. Real quick, because everyone always wants to know my opinion. What's going to happen with pricing, right? So not totally just online auction, but in general, I thought I'd throw it in here. First off, there's lots of noise, right? We're all talking about it. Most people would agree that every market, whether it's the stock market, crypto, real estate, whatever, it all feels overvalued and it all feels like something radical is going to happen, right? So there's a lot of noise happening, right? But the couple things that we know is markets are always cycles. There's never been a market in the history of the world that hasn't been a cycle, right? We just don't know when. That's it, right? So people say, will the market go down? Yes. Will the market go up? Yes. When? I don't know. I'd be a lot richer if I knew the timing on that thing. So I'll always be right if I tell you it's going to go up and it's always going to go down, right? So there's a simple answer. The other thing is one of my things that just drives me crazy, right? In the Porsche world, we're very blessed. We're typically at the top of the affluence level within this brand. So people always say to me, well, don't worry about that. You know, wealthy people, they're unaffected. Doesn't matter to them. I go, you are a fool. The only difference is if people that are very wealthy and they lose a bunch of money in the market or real estate or their business, they don't think my kid's not going to eat tomorrow, right? That's a blessing, right? But they're still emotionally affected. And purchases are emotional. Cars are emotional. So I don't care how wealthy you are, if you took a big hit in your portfolio over the last few weeks, you just feel less emotionally excited to buy new stuff. It's simple. So yeah, are they still eating? Yes. Are they still paying their mortgage? Probably. Are they going out and spending the same way they would have spent when they felt drunk and their market was going up every day? No. Come on. Let's think about that. Okay? So we're going to entering a potentially turbulent period. I think it's going to be rock and roll. Hold on. Right? The collector car market will follow other bellwether markets. Stock, real estate, and the job market. That's simple. A lot of people say, oh, that's not true. There's going to be a flight to assets and collector cars are going to do better than ever. It's like anything else, right? It's emotion driven. When people feel confident, they buy more. When they don't, they hunker down and make other choices, right? So do I think there's going to be a big crash? No. Do I think it's going to be turbulent and we're going to have some buckle your seatbelt moments? Yeah, I think we will. Yeah, it should be interesting. Should be fun. The other thing is the online auctions really will be setting the pricing. They'll let you see in real time what's happening. But don't make the fallacy that like one sale. Like people will say, oh, that car sold too cheap. That's the start of the crash. No, it's one sale. When you start seeing a trend, there you go. But the best part is if you love your Porsche, you don't view it as an investment, it doesn't really matter, right? You'll be fine. Right? Maybe you'll get lucky and be able to buy something you always wanted on a deal. I don't see that happening, but you never know. Okay, next slide. Okay, risks for sellers. We talked about this earlier, the reserve not met. You know, people saying, well, now your car's only worth X because that's what the market said. I don't think that's true, but I would agree that sentiment is out there. So don't be, I call it, don't be your own comp, right? The deadbeat buyer, we talked about that. It's way more common than people think. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's not single digit would be my guess. The other thing is the false or malicious comments. Sometimes you run an auction and someone just has malicious intent for whatever reason. And you'll see some comments put on cars that are actually just factually not true. Oh, I remember this car went into the wall at 140 miles an hour VIR. Wow, this car has spent its whole life in Oregon. Like, how did that happen? Right? And now that's forever out there. Right? And so I see some people that now fight stigma on their car that's not actually even true. And then you start finding out, oh, well, there was a similar car that happened to, right? Or other things like that. So it doesn't mean don't use it, because again, I like online auctions, but again, there are some risks out there. Okay, next slide here. Okay, risks for buyers. This one's really simple. This is your single biggest one. This is a shocker. Car is not as represented? No. This doesn't happen. That's the best part of online auctions. This has actually never happened, but it could. I mean, I've never seen it happen, but you could be the first. So I want to warn you, do not be the first. So you get these really cool, sexy, Instagram-worthy photos, again, and the cars always come off the truck with white gloves, and they're flawless. That's the best part of the online auction experience, right? But every so often, if I'm being honest, some people call me and they go, wow, this car came off the truck and I was speechless. Not necessarily speechless in the way I thought it was going to be. Now, people say to me, well, you don't hear that much about this. And I go, well, think about it. So now you own said car. You're speechless. You're pissed. You kick the dog. Your wife makes you sleep on the couch. Nearly divorced. You're so angry you're seeing red, right? And then you think, what am I going to do? I'll wait 6 months and I'll come up with a fanciful lie and I'll put it back up. My favorite one is always, I have to pay my daughter's college tuition. 6 months ago, you probably had an 18-year-old daughter. Right? Or my other one, I don't have enough garage space. You're right, when you bought that, you didn't know what your garage was going to look like. Right? I mean, it's just funny. Or I have too many cars, I need to thin down my collection. You just bought this to add to the collection. But nevertheless, right, I think this is often, so no one says anything bad because you're not going to denigrate the car you now own because now you're going to negatively impact, right, the value. I mean, no one wants to torch their own car's value, so they just fix a few things and put it back up for sale. The other thing is that there's a lot of panic in today's world about handling a large dollar amount with a stranger. So again, back to our example, Vu's my buyer. Vu takes a look at me, he says, well, he's a shady used car dealer. I don't want to send him $100,000. Well, that's the way it's going to work. So Vu has to trust me, right? And generally it works out, but there's still that level of anxiety about sending money to someone halfway around the country or sometimes around the world for a car you've never seen to a person you've never met, right? A lot of people assume that these auctions would somehow be part of that. Nope, not at all. Yep.
Safest way, or what is the preferred way to send money?
So here's a tough one. I will say definitively there is no 100% safe way to send money. So that's the number one caveat. Anytime you send money, there's always some risk involved. Generally, the gold standard is a wire transfer. One of the things you have to be really, really careful about, however, is that it happens more often in real estate transactions, but they must do some sort of phishing on the back end. They're intercepting emails, and they'll change information. So you'll email someone your wiring instructions. Someone will intercept that email, adjust it, and magically those won't be your account numbers. They'll be someone in the Cayman Islands, right? Oh. So you send off your $83,000 and you think your new 991 is going to show up, and the guy's like, you didn't pay me. And you're like, oh, I definitely paid you. And then you have this really weird thing, which I'm not smart enough to figure this one out. You go to your bank and they're like, we don't know. We just followed the instructions. And they act as if the money went into the ether. I'm like, well, you knew where it went. It had a number, right? But you're usually just out, right? So that's the thing you got to be really careful on. So what you want to do is, what I always do is I'll send instructions out and always have the instruction to have a phone call before I actually press send, and I verify. So I get Vu on the phone. Actually, I have my banker do it, actually. I give my banker, I say, hey, give Vu a call. would you verify that what I have that I sent you matches what he has verified, right? That's the best way to do it. Other ways, obviously in today's world, cash is pretty much a no-no of that large amount. Cashier's checks, people put stop payments on, or they can be printed in the basement. So if you want to be 100% confident of it, I can't give you that confidence. I can say if you do the wire transfer and you do the actual, that verifies generally that the money gets there. It still doesn't verify that the person on the other end is going to do what they're supposed to do.
So
Right.
you still have somewhat of a worries about not having, you've transferred the money and you don't have a actual title in hand or an accurate title?
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that the online auction companies in theory do is they make someone send them a copy of the title, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually have it or it's in their name, right? So it's a little bit better. It's actually one of the reasons I like to deal in person. So when I tell people I buy cars, I go buy them in person. Like for example, we did a Tech Tactics. I bought a Boxster from a PCA member in Maryland. He brought it to PCA headquarters. I met him eye to eye. He was a great guy. He was a club member. I paid him, and he gave me the title. And I had the car. Like it was very nice and clean. I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I understand that it's a little challenging oftentimes, but yeah, so that's a little bit tricky. Okay, next slide here. Okay, when to bring in an expert? As a buyer, I would say for the initial vetting via the provided information, meaning that I have a lot of people that call me and they say, hey, I'm looking at this car, on XYZ site. Can you look at it for me? I'll say, sure. And I'll look at it, and 90% of the time, I can look at it and I can tell you that there's something awry just by looking at the phone. If it passes that test, then I'll say, oh, it looks pretty good. I would encourage you to get a local expert or a PPI on the ground where the car's at. Now, most people resist to me because they say, well, but what if I'm not the high bidder and then I spent this money on the PPI? I get it, so you're out your few $100. Now, is the flip side. You're the high bidder and you win the car, and the car is not remotely what it's supposed to be. You're out $300 or $400, could be out $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. It's risk reward, right? I'd rather spend a few bucks. It also makes you more diligent. It makes you say, am I really committed to buying this car, or am I just daydreaming about it, right? So I'm a big fan of, for example, you don't even have to necessarily always pay someone. I use PCA all the time. Like I've got PCA friends in almost every major town, and I'll call someone and I'll say, hey, I know a guy who's in Indianapolis. He's knowledgeable about 928s, and I call him, I love to look at 928s, and he'll mosey over there and look at it for me. And then he'll also say, oh, the dude's really cool. I don't know him, but it turns out he went to high school with my brother, and also now there's a level of comfort dealing with this person because I know he's real, someone's actually seen the car, right? And the other thing is when to bring in an expert. If you're a seller, again, if you're unwilling to execute the formula of excellence, yes, hire someone to do it. The other thing that's, I'll be honest, I'll share my woes being in the business with you on this one, right? I'm struggling how to handle this as a business owner because, for example, if you list a car on an online auction site and the transaction goes poorly, all that can happen to you is that person could badmouth you and say, that seller, that dastardly dude, he, whatever, right? I have a reputation. So now I've traded a fee for the risk that if I sell a car and something goes wrong, I potentially have to make it right to save my reputation, even if it's not my fault. So I'll be honest, I'm struggling with how I want to manage this for my business moving forward, right? But yeah, this is where you want to sometimes bring in someone who's experienced to help you manage that process. And then as a seller, actually I have it both saying seller. What did I do? Oh, anyway, yeah. Top results are almost always achieved. Again, if you look at all the top results, there's about 5 top sellers on there. And I wouldn't necessarily say you just got to use those top 5, but you can see who's getting good results. They know the formula for photography, for video, for paint meter photos, all the stuff that they need, right? And generally, most of them are going to charge you a fee, but it's just like having a good real estate agent. You'll get more for your property because you listed it in the right place than if you sold it by yourself. So, okay, next one. Other topics people always ask me about, shills. People always rail. Those are all shill bids in there. Well, if you're new to auctions, let me just let you in on a big secret. Shills have been happening since the dawn of time at auctions. They're there. They'll always be there. Yes, the auction houses know about it, and no, they can't stop it. And as a guy in the business, I'm here to tell you, people think this is weird. I could care less. I know that's a controversial opinion, because here's what ultimately, you as a buyer, or anyone as a buyer, should establish in your head, what's this car worth to me? And you should personally have the wherewithal to say, I'm willing to pay up to $50,000 for the car. And if a shill brings you along and you pay $65,000, well, that's not on the shill, that's on you not having the personal wherewithal to stick to your guns. Like if I'm bidding on a car, and whether this is in a live auction or not, you guys think it's funny, I actually write my number down and I show it to somebody. Because I'm like anybody else, I get emotional, right? And that's why I say, okay, I'm bidding 50 grand. And there's times where it's like, the last bid's 50,200. I'm like, well, it's another 500 bucks, right? I'd be a fool not to get it for another 500 bucks. And then next thing you know, right? So decide what your number is and stick to it. So yes, you're not going to stop the shills. There's always someone who says they should root those people out. They're probably buddies with the seller. Yeah, they very well might be. And sometimes they get stuck with the car, right? Scams, yeah, they happen too. I mean, that's just life's reality. The other thing is people say, well, what about photo editing and other creativity? Yes. Oh my God, did a seller Photoshop out that big damage in that car? Oh my God, right? In fact, I had something similar happen to a guy, and I said, well, interestingly enough, it doesn't show in the photos in the auction, but it's on the transport report, you know, when the transporter picked it up in their photo. So my customer called me, he didn't buy it through me, and I said, well, go back to the seller and just, here's the photo, it's sitting in front of your dealership, there's the damage. Because the seller's like, nope, you must have damaged it yourself. And it's like, and then when you actually look at the photos and you really drill into it, you can see they just sort of magically just kind of smooth that over, right? The other thing is buyer conditions after the sale. Again, we talked about this. This is where people say, oh, good, I'm glad I won the auction because I get my bonus in January and I'll pay you. It's June, right? I mean, you guys laugh, but this crap really happens. Or, oh, I couldn't sleep. I didn't think my wife would say yes, and she kind of did, but I got to sell this other car before I can do it. That's her condition. Now, you committed to buying a car, right? So that's one of the other things. Does it happen? Yes, it does. Okay.
Nathan,
next.
can I interrupt you? There's a question from Francisco Silva online. Can you go to the seller in person after agreeing to buy online, and is that frequently done?
Yes. So can you, and are you obliged? So basically, again, if you're the high bidder and you win the car, all that you've entered into is basically the agreement for the right to purchase it, right? Now, and you owe the online auction company the 5%, right? But there's no legally enforceable agreement that you have to purchase the car. And the only kind of carrot or sword or whatever you want to call it that the online auction company has is they can ban you, right? That's it. So yeah, if you look at the car after you've bid on it and you don't like it or you didn't get approval from your spouse, yeah, is it unethical? I think it's unethical. I'm a man of my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Not everyone thinks that way. So, yeah.
One more question. We talked about online auctions today, but how about Chris Henley here? Do you value the PCA Mart, PCA's classifieds, and you know, what factors would you consider to make the Mart better?
I love Porsche's online marketplace. I think it's a fabulous place because there's, fair or not fair, I have maybe a step-up level of comfort that we're kind of part of the same crew of people, right? We share similar values, and so we have a common language. If someone says my car is condition 2, it likely still isn't a condition 2, but you know they're trying their best to be good. And there's also, it's like the 6 degrees of separation I like. So I say, oh, they're Chesapeake region. I have a friend in the Chesapeake region, and I call him, oh yeah, he's a great guy. It's cool, you know. Or she loves that car. We see it at a lot of stuff. That is great comfort to me. So would I rather buy a car from a PCA member than just someone off the street? Absolutely. I think the ways they could improve it, I could go on for days. But I think overall they do a good job. Food don't make that look.
That's why they asked.
Yeah, no, most of my issues with the site are more just technological. But for the most part, I've had great luck with PCA members. I can count on one hand how many times I've had a PCA member do something I thought was kind of, against core values of the club. And I know we're a diverse group of people. We got 100,000 of us, so it's hard for us all to think the same. But there is sort of this, like if you're dorky enough to wear a shirt that says Porsche and go to things like this and Q-tip your car, it kind of says you're a little bit of an odd duck, and we're kind of family in that, right?
A family of odd ducks.
Yes, there you go.
Any questions for Nathan from the crowd?
Nathan,
Sure.
you mentioned the shipping the money off and waiting for the car to appear, which we've all done. Is there any sort of escrow company that
Let me repeat that for our listeners. So the question was, when you're transferring sums of money, is there truly an escrow service? Because you've heard that, or you've seen that sort of approach or email that you get. I love your car. Let's put it in an escrow. Is that a real thing?
Yeah, so in theory, yes, there are some companies that have attempted to be in that space, but one of the problems is the scammers kind of owned that space first, and so when people hear escrow, they think their great-great-uncle in Nigeria who died, who's going to send $50 million if you do the taxes. People hear that and they just panic, and so most sellers just say, I don't want to do that. So yeah, I think one of the killer apps is if it could be through the auction company, right? They could do that. But the big reason they don't want to do it because they know it's fraught with peril. So why would they want to take on all that liability? Because the average consumer wouldn't perceive the dollar value as high enough that the auction company could charge enough to cover their risk for peril. I mean, it's what it boils down to.
On online sites, is there a monitor that disingenuous comments on?
Yes. So they all have moderators. If you don't know this, well, you'll find out. If you're commonly controversial or you say things they view as disparaging, they'll moderate out your comments. I think there's also been situations where maybe some auction houses have a different view, and so I've seen them moderate comments I think are perfectly legitimate comments, but maybe someone could view them as negative because they asked a tough question, right? So you got to be a little bit careful how they're moderating some of those things. And if you're on their bad list, which is kind of like the no-fly list, then usually what happens is before they absolutely ban you, they put you on a delay. And so some people, if you've ever noticed, if you put a comment on these sites and your comment doesn't immediately appear, it's because it goes to a review. And there's a live person that reads your comment and says, well, Vu's kind of chippy with people, so we're going to put him on a 5-minute delay. So yeah, if you've ever wondered about that.
In the back.
Nathan, can you speak to the change in demographics and the shift of the generations here and how it's affecting value? Using, like, an example, model 8, model 8, and then start to move up.
Yeah.
As people get older, get the cars they want, and suddenly that market starts to fade.
Yeah, so one of the things that's...
Why don't you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question essentially deals with generational shift in desirability of cars over time. With the general idea that a car that was appealing to my dad or grandfather isn't as appealing to me, and the cars that are appealing to me are not as appealing to my son, as an example, right? There's a lot of noise around this in the marketplace, and I think that if we talk overall collector car space, that phenomenon is kind of well known and well proven. That cars, as people move out of that core phase, which really is 35 to 65 when people were acquiring, and generally post that they start thinning down their collection and stop driving, right, as they move to the end of life, right? So there's this kind of natural progression. But Porsche is unique because one of the things that happens with Porsche, I think because their cars have such long legs and people are still buying new, the demographic of who has an interest, and maybe this derivation is a little bit different, but there's still an interest. So like we'll talk 356. The theory was basically like, look, all the 75 to 90-year-olds that have 356s are going to leave us, and there won't be someone who wants their car, right? That was always the noise we make. But they were wrong. But what happened is the 356 they wanted changed, right? So it used to be, for example, open 356s radically outperformed closed 356s. I mean, by a factor of like 2, 3, 4 to 1, right? Nobody wanted a closed 356. My generation wants closed 356s because we didn't grow up in a convertible generation. I didn't take my girlfriend to the drive-in. I didn't take my girlfriend to the little drive-up little movie theater and stuff, right? Convertibles weren't a thing in my generation. So to me, like, values aside, I would rather have a 356A coupe 100 times more than an A cabriolet, right? But that never would have been true in the past, right? The other difference is the younger generation wants a 356 more of an outlaw, kind of a patina car, right? Remember the conversation earlier that Patrick was having about this guy wants to say the patina, and everyone over a certain age in the thing was like, whoa, that's ridiculous. And all the young guys were like, hell yeah, I'm going to rock that, right? They both love the cars, they just appreciate them different. And so I think that's what you're going to see is just there'll be a shift in what is desirable within a model. But I don't actually see a genre of Porsche becoming like, oh, no one's even interested anymore. In fact, the one that breaks my heart the most is if someone comes to me and they have like a ruby red 61 T5B coupe that's like a condition 2-. It's just shiny and they're proud of it. The problem is I'm like, well, it's not nice enough that the true purist who wants an all original car is going to get excited about it, but it's not bad enough for the young guy. I'm like, you'd actually do better like buffing through the paint, putting hipster stickers and like banging up the bumpers and put like a Nixon sticker on the back, and it will bring more money. I kid you not.
Many people just cringed
but
in the audience.
But it's true. Like I've really had cars where I've really thought of it like kicking dents in them to increase their value. It's the most disgusting thing, but it's just because again they want those cool Instagram photo. Like here I am taking my 356 down a logging road and pretending I'm off-roading it. I'm really not, but it looks badass, right? Anything else?
There you go. Oh, we'll take one more.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you yesterday for not calling my baby yesterday. We're talking about lower value sites. What are your thoughts on a site like Cars and Bids?
So like Cars and Bids, I actually like their formula. Their formula, they do have a little bit of a different twist. They tend to focus more on like 90s and 2000s cars and generally a little bit lower value point. And their idea is to attract more of a younger demographic. So I think that I like that site because this is heresy here, but believe it or not, I don't only own Porsches. I like some other stuff, and so I go on there for kind of the goofy, kind of, I call them frivolous cars of my youth. Like I have a Miata, like an NA Miata. It's a fabulous little car. It's not a car people would have prayed to be excited about, but I think it's cool, and it'd be perfect on like Cars and Bids, right? So, yeah.
All right. Nathan Merz once again dropping knowledge to the crowd. I hope you enjoyed it. For those of you that are watching online, again, be sure to click that like button. Be sure to subscribe. Get us to 100,000 subscribers. Until next time, we'll see you.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. Good times.